Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Kristina Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for my episode today. My guests are a trio of three here, and they are members of a group called Impacted Survivors of Murder-Suicide. And they want to talk to us about grieving the loss of a loved one who has died by suicide and has committed murder, and how they found solace and solidarity in this overlooked and underserved community. So guests, if you would like, on my screen, I've got Kristina on the top. So if you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your story.
Sure. My name is Kristina. I'm actually a licensed clinical mental health counselor in Raleigh, and a grief coach because of this. My parents are I'm a survivor of my father took the life of my mom just last year in March, and then he took his own life. And we'll talk about this probably as we go through, but the stigmatism of all of this is that it was a domestic violence, and that's what media likes to portray. But actually, my parents had a really beautiful love story, and my father's act was more done in a sense of mercy. And so it's been hard for me because, you want to, as we were talking about earlier, it's just, you don't want him to be viewed as a monster, because he's not. But then it's hard to kind of rationalize him doing such an act and leaving me an orphan. So it's definitely been a journey, but finding Michael and Tina and doing what we're doing has been and will continue to be really helpful for my journey personally.
Great. And I'm so sorry for your losses. All right, Michael, you're next on my screen. So if you'd like to share your story, that'd be great.
Sure. Good morning. Thanks again for having us on your podcast. I'm Michael Vinton, and in August of 2020, I lost my brother Jimmy to a murder-suicide. He was the perpetrator. He took the life of his mother-in-law. She was 69 years old, and he was 39 years old at the time. Unfortunately, it happened in a very public place. Most murder-suicides do happen at a home or a residency, but this was in a public place. So with that being said, we found out about this by the news. And in a very unfortunate way. I mean, they weren't saying names at that time, but I live in Los Angeles, and this happened back in South Carolina. And you just kind of put the pieces together in a news story and start to do your own detective work. And anyways, immediately, it's just so shocking. And you feel like all of a sudden you're in this, I would dare to say, Lifetime movie, but that's probably too sweet. You're in this really bad HBO movie, and you don't want to be, and everything is just falling apart, everything. And this is somebody that you knew and that you loved, and they would never do this. Sometimes I still doubt that, and I ask myself, there must have been something else that caused this, it took a long time for me to find resources, and I found that so bizarre. I started with a suicide support group here in Los Angeles with Dee Dee Hirsch, who's amazing. I've done a lot of work with them. But because mine, unlike Kristina's, was with my brother and then his mother-in-law, I felt like I could focus on the suicide aspect. I was able to compartmentalize. I don't think I've dealt with his mother-in-law's murder. My brother left behind his wife, who's now widowed. She's still a member of my family. We went to high school together. I've known her for a very long time. Um, so it leaves behind a big mess, a very big mess. So when I finally found people like me, that all had stories of murder suicide,
Yeah.
oh man, it was a breath out of unfortunate fresh air because I didn't feel so bad. I could share my pain with these strangers that I've come to know.
Yeah. And not feel like not only that you're not alone, but you're not like a bad person because you're related to this person, kind of a thing. Is
Right.
kind of how I would think about that. I mean, having experienced suicide myself with my husband, I remember what that was like, and still is when I talk about it. But to add the having killed someone else a part of it too is got to be even more traumatic to talk about. So thank you for
Yeah.
that. All right, Tina, you're next.
Thank you. So I'm Tina, and in January of 2021, I lost my brother Keith. He was 49 at the time, and he took the life of his girlfriend, who was 37 at the time. He was my only sibling. He was a career nurse, and he was kind of the caretaker of the family. I grew up in a single parent home, so it was just my mom, him, and myself. And, this has really changed our lives in such a huge way. And I mean, Kristina and Michael hit on a lot of the points. We found each other, and it's made all the difference in the world. I sought out immediately help on the internet, because you're just left wondering, where do I go? What do I do? How did this happen? Why? Where are my people? What do I do? And within 2 weeks, I was able to connect with some survivors. And it's I'm coming up on 4 years. And honestly, had I not met other survivors, I don't think that the journey would have gone the way it has. It's been key to me, to my, I don't want to say healing, because I don't know that I'm not healed, but it's just part of my journey. So I'm so grateful, and these two are my people, and I love them so much.
Yeah, it's like I know, like I asked you before we started recording, are you guys actually related? Are you family members? And I'm thinking, oh, I get it. You're family members but not in a biological way. I get that. That makes complete sense to me. Absolutely. And I understand that too. I also understand the internet thing. I know for me, the internet was fairly new. When my first husband committed suicide. But I did find a group back when America Online was the online thing, and actually became the moderator of a survivors of suicide group on that site, which was amazing. And yeah, it's like you said. And we actually split it into, whether it was a spouse or a child or a parent or whatever, because the loss is so different from each of those different perspectives. So that was extremely helpful. And like you, Tina, I don't know how I would have come where I got to in the few years past that before I was able to say, oh, okay, I can deal with this now. It's changed me, but I am still okay. So there's that. Kristina, you mentioned, that your father, you thought it was more of a labor of love. So was mom sick? Maybe is that what?
No, it was a financial situation. My father definitely had a lot of secrets and a lot of things that he was keeping from all of us. And, there was, as a therapist, I've worked for years with teens and young adults who are, I call them under controllers. These are the people that, were diagnosed with, borderline and bipolar. And I'm a DBT therapist, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. So I'm just trained to do all that kind of stuff. What I'm finding is I could, probably put my father in this category, because everyone, of course, always wants to say they went crazy, they snapped, this and that. I don't believe that. I don't think it's like that at all. I think everyone, of course, it's not a one size fits all when it comes to the situation. And I think all our stories are so individualized. But in my case, I do find that the commonality with a lot of our stories is that the people that do something like this tend to be where I would call an over controller, where you don't see the signs. I think my father was chronically depressed for a really long time, but he put a smile on his face, and he was Papa and to my 3 children. And he was a great father to me. He was a fantastic husband to my mother. He never told her no. He would do anything in this world to protect all of us. And because of that, his pride got in the way, I believe. And he just, his secrets just got to the point where he couldn't hide them anymore. And so to protect my mother, I think, from further pain of what was going to happen down the line, he, I think in his mind, thought he was doing the best thing for her, because they knew each other since they were 16 years old.
Yeah.
So they were truly the definition of soulmates.
Yeah.
And I remember as a little girl always thinking that, as an only child, I would lose them together. I thought it was going to be more like The Notebook. And, it kind of was, because they died in a bed. But I kind of always knew that they were just meant to be together in this life and the next together. But never in my dreams that I think it would come down to this, because you just never think someone you love could actually do the act of this. And so as much as I want to tell myself this and believe me, there's days where I'm like, okay, I forgive him and it's okay. I see the bigger picture with this. Then there's names that I hate the hell out of him. He left me with, he changed my life. And he didn't change my life for good. And I have to now be a mother and wife and a therapist, and I have to help people. And at the end of the day, I don't feel like I'm the same person as I was a year ago. And I hate him for that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emotions that we go through. I always say as a therapist, one of the things that I realized right from the beginning is that the grief model does not apply here, not in our situation. And so I've kind of redefine what that looks like. And we can't like go through our own story of what our grief model looks like for us. And there's a lot of shame in it. There's a lot of guilt in it.
Yeah.
And I don't believe we ever get to acceptance. I think there's parts of this we can accept, but I don't think our brains will ever rationale why this happened and how this could happen. And so I think we have to almost accept that there is no acceptance. And it's hard to live your life like that, but you have to.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. Now, Michael and Tina, your experience is a little different in that it was a sibling and then a person who wasn't related to you. So I'm going to guess, and I could be wrong, that your experiences are compounded a little more by the fact that there's other families out there that are not happy, obviously, and how that impacts you. I'm not that it wouldn't be somewhat the same for you, Kristina, but I'm just thinking, if it was my parents, that'd be horrible, awful. But if it's my sibling and now there's another family involved, how that would make me feel. Or so, Dita, whatever you want to speak to that.
I never met her, so it's even more difficult in some ways. And she was a mother of 2 children, 2 young children, also makes it more difficult. So, but I think about all the time when the holidays come around. I always think about those children, and it's very difficult, very, very difficult.
Yeah. So it almost, I don't mean to put a feeling upon you, but I'm almost feeling like maybe you feel a little bit guilty, like maybe somehow this is somehow has something to do with you because it was your brother, when in reality nothing to do with you. Is that when you say you're thinking about the kids and you're feeling bad for the kids, it's like you didn't do anything to those kids. You know what I'm saying? That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do. You feel like, okay, well, he's not here. So what do I do to kind of make up? I can't make up for what he did. That's not even, but how do I somehow, deal with this and live forward with this, knowing what he did. And it takes every day. It takes me getting out of bed and making the effort to figure out how I'm going to face the day.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely understand that. So, Michael, did you want to share something about that topic?
Yeah, just a couple things. Rightfully, the other family was very upset, and sometimes there can be legal troubles that come out of this that you have to protect yourself from. I've thought about this, if this was reversed and my sister-in-law did this to my mother, yes, I would feel exactly the way they do. I don't fault them at all for their feelings. And my brother was also a part of their family. And so there were a couple of his nieces that wanted to come to his service. We respectfully let them have their service first, and then we did my brother's a few days later. And this was during COVID, and so you never knew if anybody was going to show up anyways, you know? And they wanted to come, but we just felt you didn't know what was going to happen, you know? And I'm so thankful and grateful for their support and their love. But I just keep going back to what I said earlier. It can just be so messy, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I've done a lot of research for the classes that I teach on grief and so on. And there's a YouTube video out there made by the woman whose son was one of the Columbine killers. And she talks about what it's like to be the mother of this kid and how people look at her and somehow, how did you not know? Or what kind of a monster did you raise? And all those kinds of questions, as if it's somehow her fault or that she bears some kind of responsibility, which of course she doesn't. You know, I mean, it's just one of those things where, you know, you have that difficulty, you know, really being able to discuss it with someone. I know for me, having survived a suicide, I experienced my husband's family blamed me for that. It was a very ugly time. Actually shunned me and my young kids for a long time. So it was ugly, and I learned that death brings out the worst in people. If they've got the worst in them, you're going to find out what it is when someone dies, because death and money, but especially death, people just don't respond well at all. So I totally get that. So I'm guessing you all met online as some sort of a support group, and you've now formed your own website where you have your own grief support group. And I know you've got a podcast that's about to come out, and you've got a blog and so on. So tell us a little bit about, you know, your website and kind of where you're going with the grief therapy or support groups, whatever that you're doing.
You want me to start with it?
Sure.
So yeah, we met in a group, and it was a peer-led group. And we just found, for the three of us, and I think for many other people, it's we needed more. It's as much as a peer-led group is wonderful, and it's nice to hear other people's stories, it can be very triggering. I've led many groups in my practice and stuff, and so I tried to go with the perspective of you're a survivor, not a therapist. But then I also found, like, oh, yowza, there's a lot of things that shouldn't be said in certain of these groups, and I think there needs to be a little bit more carefulness when it comes to these, because this topic is just so intense. So we wanted to do something where it was more specialist led, a little bit more structured, and for people that want to get past the day one. You know, we understand that, you know, when you're in it and the shock, you know, all you want to do is just find your people. But there does have to come a time in grief where you do have to kind of move the dial a little bit, you know. And so we have found that's where there's a lot of lack in resources for our particular topic. I to this day cannot find another therapist that has ever dealt with another murder-suicide. And so for me, I can't find a therapist that can help me, which is really frustrating. We've all kind of had the same situations. And so we felt like, okay, we need to put some resources out there to help people like us, specifically with this particular topic, because as much as, you know, there's like that suicide circle and then murder-suicide, like say, it clumped in with that, we do believe that we have to push that outside of that bubble, because this is a different situation. Like for me, I tried to go to a homicide group, but then if I'm doing that, I'm maybe healing with my mother, but then what about my father? And if I go to a suicide group, now I'm not honoring my mother. So this is a specialty type of thing. And so part of what we want to do is create a 10-week course, which is kind of like a self-study course. So when people are kind of in it, they have this ability to download this course, and at the same time, they can go to us for any comfort. What do we call them? Tina, what are they called? The talking phone calls?
Oh, the comfort calls.
Comfort calls. And then, you know, there's a support group whenever that's needed, because, you know, as they go through the course, there's obviously going to be things that are triggering and they're going to have to process. And so we're with them at the same time, but we want to give people space to do the course in their own time as well. And so again, these are for people that I think the shock is kind of worn off just a little bit. I mean, we always I still feel like I'm in shock sometimes. But these are for people that have kind of been through despair for a really, really long time. And they're kind of now realizing that they have to kind of pull themselves out of that hole. And then in their own time, they can do this course, and, they can hopefully find forgiveness. They can hopefully find that they don't have to suffer anymore. And I think that is probably our biggest mission here, is that we want people to understand that, this pain will never go away. This is unfortunately the reality of our life going forward, but suffering's a choice. And we want people to realize that they don't have to suffer in this anymore. And so there's resources, and there's just different ways that we can reframe things and challenge certain things where we can make life worth living again. And if we can do that through this course and through our support, that's kind of what we'd like to do.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else, Michael?
Yeah, there's more we're doing too. So
any other of you want to talk about more?
Yeah, that's just one thing we're doing.
One of our other initiatives is to raise the awareness around murder-suicides. And you brought up Sue Klebold earlier. She's the mother of Dylan Klebold. And when I was first researching for support, she came up a lot for me. And so I watched her TED Talk.
Yeah.
And I was in high school when the Columbine shootings happened. And I'll just say that I have a very different opinion than when I was in high school, than what I do now. And as we're raising the awareness and we've been speaking at conferences, we've found through meeting other mental health organizations that Sue, and a couple other people have been pioneering, a couple years before us. So really paving the way to talk more openly about this as survivors of the perpetrator.
Right.
And that's another purpose of our podcast, Love, Losing, and Layers, the complexities of murder-suicide, out later this year. But the hard part is we're having trouble getting people to come on, even if they want to be anonymous, or it's hard to talk about.
Yeah.
Tina and I also contributed to a book recently that came out on Amazon. It's called The Untold Stories of Murder-Suicides. It's a collective, and we all kind of donated some stories to just let people know that they're not alone, most importantly.
Yeah.
Tina, talk about the media.
Yes. The media is one of the things that we've all had a really awful experience with. It's just, they're so sensationalized, and these types of stories, they just take it and they run. They don't care about facts. They don't care about survivors. And we would love to have some conversations and show them the faces of who's left behind. And this is what you've done to us. This is how you make us feel. There was recently an episode of The View where they were talking about, there was a gentleman that was on Reddit, and he had bought what they called a murder house. There was a murder-suicide that happened in this home. So he got it for, a reasonable price, and his fiance moved in unknown. She did not know that had happened there, but she found out through neighbors. So then, she couldn't believe it. And it was this big, huge, thing. Like, was he right? Was he wrong? And they made light of it. They laughed about it. One of them said, "Oh, this would be great. We could have a podcast live from the murder house." And it was so incredibly insensitive, everything that they had said to us, because the reality of it is we're left trying to sell the murder house. We have to clean up the murder house. Kristina and I both had to deal with that. And they don't get names correct. They're giving out addresses publicly. So now you have people driving by. I mean, it creates so many ripple effects, and it affects us so adversely. And it's just something there's guidelines that they need to follow, but I think they need to be even stricter. And I think also when it comes to social media, when they're reporting on these stories, I think they need to shut off commenting, because everybody's a keyboard warrior and everybody can point a finger, but God help you you know, don't think that it ever can't happen to you.
Yeah.
So.
That's an excellent point. And I said that to people too. Don't you? And I also, I firmly believe that people don't want to talk about the issue. Like if you talk about suicide or the death of a child or a drug overdose, they're like, oh, and I think a lot of the reason why that's that pushback is because no one wants to believe it can actually happen to you. And I've had people actually say to me in my life, especially with my son being injured due to medical malpractice, I've got all these years of working in healthcare. People have said, oh my God, if it can happen to you, it could happen to anybody. And I'm like, yeah, it can. It actually can. I mean, you've got, a therapist in our group here that it can happen to anybody. It's just, it's not, it doesn't pick and choose, if you will, that sort of thing. And I kind of want to talk about anger. So I know, Kristina, you were kind of mentioning about, feeling angry about at dad and so on. And I kind of wondered, do you feel like people think maybe not so much you, Kristina, because it was your parents, but maybe Michael and Tina, people feel like you really don't have the right to be angry because you weren't the victim, it was your family member that caused this. So I'm just, does that ever come across where it's like, you weren't this, you weren't that, he killed himself. So therefore, it's not like he was victimized, right? It's kind of, I'm just thinking of it kind of from how my experiences with just the suicide part of it, how that might be amplified with the murder added to it. So does that resonate with either one of you at all?
I think a little bit. It's interesting because, with anger, I felt like everybody was angry at him. Everybody hated him. Yeah, members of my family, people I don't know, their family, and that was the last thing I was going to do is be angry at him. When I finally got the police report and read through it with a fine-tooth comb, there was going to be clues in there that was going to help me figure out why. And when I looked at the pictures, my first thought was, boy, he was really in a lot of pain. And I didn't know. I really didn't know.
Yeah.
I told my brother everything. He was the first person that I told that I was gay when I came out, he was that person you really go to with big problems,
Yeah.
Not like, oh my gosh, so-and-so is talking about me behind my back,
Yeah.
He went to Jimmy with like, hey, I think I made a bad financial investment or something, and so I felt like I missed this big clue. So there was no way I was going to be angry with him, but because I felt like everybody else was. My job is as a family member, is to love him and continue to keep loving him.
Yeah. Oh, it makes perfect sense. Is that kind of where you are too, Tina?
Yeah, I don't think that I've really felt anger. I felt a lot of things, but I don't think I've really felt a lot of anger. I feel a lot of, I guess, guilt and shame. When I go out in public, when I go back to my hometown where we grew up, I just still to this day, I just feel like I'm walking around with like that scarlet letter. Everybody's looking at me. I can remember going to a funeral. I think it was about a month after my brother passed. I went back to my hometown. And it was somebody, there was a lot of people there. And I just feel like that day had nothing to do with me. But yet I felt so overwhelmed with like, oh my God, everybody's looking at me. Everybody's talking to me. I had to step out and go sit in my car for a while. And I actually wrote while I was in my car before we went to the cemetery. And I still feel like that when I go to my hometown. I feel just very like just singled out. And it's very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that that's not what's happening. That's only in my mind.
Yeah.
But it's one of the biggest things that I've noticed is just feeling that singled out.
Yeah.
Feeling.
Is it a small town sort of thing?
It has grown quite a bit since I've moved out, but it was a small town. Yeah.
Like everybody knows everybody kind of town.
Everybody knows everybody.
Love
Mhm.
those.
Yeah.
So Michael, you mentioned the term, or the thought, your brother was in a lot of pain. So I know my experience and my research after my husband's suicide definitely shows that the person was in a lot of pain. I mean, and those of us, especially those of us who are the closest to them, don't always recognize that pain, right? You don't see it in the moment. I know for me, I was furious with my husband when he killed himself. Absolutely furious. How could you do this to me and our children? I was beside myself, furious. I mean, I just, and then the aftermath with his family, I was like, you did this to me. And then I had to grasp, no, you didn't do it. It's not me. You didn't do it to me. It's not about me. It's about you. And I had to really, that was a bridge for me to cross to get there, to not think about, why did I miss this? You know, who were you? How did I not know this? How did this whatever come to be? And realize that the suicidal mind is that tunnel vision thing you guys all know. I mean, it's just that whole thing where you're like, oh, once you understand that, then you can have a little more understanding, and I'll even say a little more empathy toward the person, which it took me years to get there, but this just was my part of it. And like you, I think what got me to the point where I could talk about it and be more open about it was finding other people who'd been in my shoes and not have somebody go, oh, so how did you not know he was that ill? How could you not know that he was capable of this? How could you not see that? It's like, you know what? Why don't you put yourself in my shoes and go back in time and see what you think and what you feel and what you knew? Because you know what, it's a moot point right now. It's done. It's happened. So you guys, what's in the future for you? I know you've got the podcast is coming. Where else do you see yourself going to really kind of help other people and keep this train rolling to where people can talk about this? There's publications about it. There's not this complete stigma and oh wow and all that about it. Where I'd like to think about even where it doesn't get to the point where the news media thinks it's such a great thing they have to report on it all the time. It's like, not that it happens that often, but it's really not. It's painful, and it's not something that the survivors that are those of us left behind really should have to deal with. It's not viewers need. I mean, kind of what are you guys thinking about for the future?
Well, we definitely have a lot of things. I mean, that's the problem too. We're just three. So we have a lot of ideas, but it's just a matter of, how can we put this all in action? But some of the things is we do want to create some sort of media release where we can just say, this is for murder-suicide, this is what you do, and just kind of blast it out everywhere. And we hope that we can just change the language, change the dialogue, change the narrative, because there's certain things that shouldn't have to be published. It's not necessary to put how many times, my father shot my mother. You know what I mean? Like, that's not necessary. My children have to read that. And, there's be future grandchildren, knock on wood, I hope to have, and, they don't need to be reading that. So, that those things need to be regulated, and there needs to be a little bit more accountability with that. And then for the survivors too, you grieve in a vacuum, and this is why the course is so important. But even in just the very beginnings, I never knew that I would have to hire someone to take out my parents' mattress. Like, those are things that you don't think of, and I didn't get to have a funeral for my parents because it was so sensationalized. So that's a lot of shame and guilt I have. But, if someone were to tell me in the beginning that this is all stuff that you're going to have to think about and deal with and process, it would have been life-changing, I think. And so one of the things we want to do is have these business cards kind of put out with a QR code that we can send out to first responders and say, hey, listen,
I love that.
We know that, you're doing whatever you can, your scope of practice in the beginning, but if you can just hand this out to these people and bring them right to our resource, and right away they can have in those first few moments, an idea of stay off social media, you might have to do this and you might have to encounter this, and just some ideas of what's going to be happening in the next 72 hours, next month, I'm in my second year, and I can tell you the grieving has been so different from the first year. So just maybe giving them kind of a perspective of what's to come, I think would be really helpful. And so those are just a couple things on top of the parts that we want to do.
The thing I love about that the most is not only that it would obviously help the people who are in the moment, but those first responders. I know a lot of times, and I know many of them where they feel like, I don't know what to do. I have no tools. I have nothing. What can I do for this person other than just, deal with the situation, take the report, whatever. But to be able to give them something and say, I mean, it's like, it's going to make me tear up saying it, but really this can help you if you take a look at this, and here's some resources for it. I can see that being so amazingly helpful to those first responders as well, who are traumatized as well by many of these events. And I also want to say to your point, Kristina, that one thing I would say, and I will have said it many, many times, is when someone dies by suicide, asking the person how that person died is one of the most insensitive and horrible things you can possibly do. So to have that be reported, how the person died or how they killed someone else, I mean, to me, that's just I mean, I saw that in your notes about, we don't want to talk about that. I thought that'd be the last thing I'm going to ask you. Anyway, it's not relevant, and it doesn't make a difference. So I'm so sorry. And to think about, your kids having to read that as they go forward, it breaks my heart. It absolutely breaks my heart. So
It breaks my heart too.
yeah, my heart goes out to you on that one. So Michael or Tina, anything else you'd like to share about what you have in the future, what's coming?
Sure. Kind of circling back. So the data for murder suicides is a little skewed sometimes. People report differently, but in our research, we found about 700 of them occur every year. So that is about one every day. And we have set up alerts for more information. And there's literally a news article every day for a new one. And also, to your point about the kids, in our groups, we've met people that have lost their spouse or their ex-spouse, and they've taken their children. And so, to your point, also circling back about first responders, I mean, the scenes are it's nothing you want to walk into. So, with those helping the first responders, we want to continue speaking at conferences and raising the awareness, do a little bit more with the continuing education conferences that we've spoken at, and helping these clinicians learn more about murder suicides and how they can potentially help, since we felt so helpless before.
Yes.
Oh gosh, no, I think that's, well, I'm blanking on everything else that I wanted to say. But predominantly the initiative of raising awareness and getting out. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. I was so inspired by Sue Klebold and her TED Talk. I actually applied for one in the area and I was turned down. That's okay. So we'll keep going. But anything that we can do to just put a face to a name and to name it, I think would really help.
Now, Sue's TED Talk, I show it in my classes, because I do a scenario in a grief class that I teach about how we feel about people who are gone. And I use the scenario of a woman whose son is in the military and he's over in wherever, and he rushes into a building to save all these children and he gets killed in the process. And what word do we use about him? And everybody says hero. And then I've got the guy who's, maybe he's driving, he's drunk and he's upset about his wife filed for divorce, and so he's driving and he runs into another family and everybody dies. And what do we think about him? But then I say, let's talk about their moms, how their moms feel. So the mom of the hero is probably being told oh, your son was a hero, he's this, that. The mom of the other guy is not, right? Because of the way that he died and how other people went with him. So I think that bringing that awareness is an amazing thing. And like I said, I'm floored by your thought about the first responders, because I think that's an amazing idea that I can't imagine why that wouldn't take hold. And I cannot imagine why they wouldn't do a TED Talk for you, Michael, because I would find that to be super powerful. Sue's was very powerful for me. Like I said, I show it all the time in my classes. So it's one of those where, think about the people who are still here rather than, the people, yes, they were, and they're gone. And we don't want to define people by how they died, but there are still people still here, and they, shouldn't be treated differently because of how their person left this world. So that, I think, is an incredibly important point to make. But Tina, did you have anything else you wanted to share about moving forward, steps, things that you guys are working on or thinking about?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that we'd like to do that I'm pretty passionate about is have workshops doing different things, because there's so many different relationships. There's murder suicide, but there's so many. We did a small study of the survivors that we met. We had a group of 62, and of the 62, there are 41 unique relationships within that group. So we just like to have different options for people to come to our website, maybe do a prompted journaling. Music is a really big healer. There was one song I think I listened to every single day after I lost my brother. And ironically, I had never heard it before I lost him, but somehow it came to me when I lost him, and I listened to it every day. So I'd love to kind of do music therapy, art therapy, just have different options for people, because everybody needs something different. And that's why we're doing this, just to get different options to help survivors like us.
Yeah. No, it's great mission. It's just a perfect example of taking something horrible and making something positive out of it, which, I mean, what else can you do with it? You just, yeah. So again, your website's called Impacted Survivors of Murder Suicide. And your blog is posted on your website. Is that right? And you're going to have your podcast coming out, and you're going to call that, remind me.
Love Losing in Layers.
There we go. Love Losing in Layers. I love that too. That's a perfect title for what you're actually going to be doing. So as I mentioned, we're going to put in the podcast notes so people can find your website, find out more about you. I'm 100% certain there'll be people who will watch this or hear this and have been in your shoes. So you may end up picking up some other people that would like to join your mission. And I hope that does occur, because they're out there. I mean, I don't want them to be out there, but they're out there. And I'd like them to find people like you to help, right? Get them involved. I'm sure everybody's got a story, and everybody's story is somehow helpful to other people, and it helps us to share. So there's that. So any final comments any of you'd like to make before we close today?
Thank you for making this opportunity available to us. Having you here and listening to us is more than a lot of people have done and able to do. So thank you for creating this space and this time.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being my guests.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that the stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.